The morning sun barely pierced the crimson horizon when the screams began. Kachina jolted awake on her woven mat as her grandmother Shimasani burst through the entrance of their adobe dwelling, her weathered face twisted with terror. Outside, the sounds of chaos erupted across their small Navajo settlement nestled in the shadow of the Arizona mountains. Horses whinnied in panic, children cried, and the urgent voices of the tribal elders cut through the desert air like broken glass. "Grandmother, what's happening?" Kachina whispered, her small hands clutching the turquoise pendant around her neck, a gift from her late mother. Shimasani knelt beside her granddaughter, her dark eyes reflecting a fear Kachina had never seen before. "The water, child. The sacred spring that has blessed our people for countless generations, it has turned to blood." Through the dwelling's small window, Kachina could see the settlement's men and women gathering around what had been their life-giving spring since before memory. Where crystal-clear water once bubbled from the earth, now a dark crimson liquid seeped from the ground, staining the red rocks an even deeper shade of terror. Elder Hosteen Begay's voice boomed across the settlement, his words heavy with ancient knowledge and present dread. "This is no natural occurrence. The spirits are angry. We must perform the cleansing ceremonies immediately, or our people will perish in this unforgiving land." But as the tribal council gathered in urgent discussion, 8-year-old Tommy Yazzie, the settlement's fastest runner, came sprinting back from the eastern mesa, his face pale with exhaustion and fear. "The soldiers!" he gasped, pointing toward the horizon where a cloud of dust marked the approach of cavalry. "Blue coats! At least 20 riders, maybe more! They're coming this way, and they don't look friendly." The blood-red spring was no longer their only concern. In the harsh reality of 1880s Arizona territory, the arrival of U.S. cavalry usually meant forced relocation, broken treaties, or worse. Their small community, hidden in this remote canyon for the past 3 years, had finally been discovered. Shimasani's hand instinctively tightened around Kachina's shoulder. The old woman had lived through the long walk of 1864, when thousands of Navajo had been forcibly marched to internment at Bosque Redondo. She knew the signs, the sounds, the inevitable tragedy that followed the thunder of cavalry hooves. "We must prepare for the worst," she whispered to her granddaughter. "But first, we need water. Real water." As panic spread through the settlement, Kachina noticed something the adults had missed in their fear. Near the contaminated spring, where the red liquid oozed from the earth, strange tracks marked the soft sand. Not the tracks of horses, cattle, or any animals she recognized. These were different. Serpentine. Massive. The impression of something that had slithered across the ground with the weight of a full-grown man. While the elders debated and the women packed their most precious belongings, Kachina slipped away from her grandmother's protective embrace. Her bare feet moved silently across the cool sand as she followed the mysterious tracks away from the settlement, away from the approaching danger, deeper into the maze of red rock canyons that her people called home. The tracks led her past the familiar landmarks of her childhood. The twisted juniper tree where she often played with her cornhusk doll. The smooth boulder where Shimasani told her stories of Spider Grandmother and the Hero Twins. The narrow passage between 2 towering rock formations that the adults had always warned her never to enter alone. But this morning was different. This morning, terror drove her forward, and curiosity overwhelmed caution. As she squeezed through the passage, the sounds of her panicking settlement faded behind her, replaced by an eerie silence that seemed to press against her ears like invisible hands. The canyon walls rose higher here, creating shadows that the morning sun couldn't penetrate. Ancient petroglyphs covered the rock faces, telling stories in a language older than memory. That's when she saw it. At first, Kachina thought her eyes were playing tricks on her. In the dancing shadows and shifting light, something moved with a grace that seemed to defy the laws of nature. But as her vision adjusted to the canyon's perpetual twilight, the impossible became undeniably real. A snake. But not like any snake that existed in the natural world. This creature was enormous, easily 20 feet long and thick as a man's torso. Its scales caught and reflected light like polished gold, creating a mesmerizing pattern that seemed to shift and flow even when the great serpent was perfectly still. As it moved through the canyon with liquid smoothness, Each scale caught the filtered sunlight and threw it back in brilliant flashes that hurt to look at directly. The giant snake's head was magnificent and terrible, crowned with what appeared to be a natural crest of golden spines that caught the light like a headdress worthy of the greatest chiefs. Its eyes, large as a child's fists, glowed with an inner fire that seemed to see not just Kachina's physical form, but something deeper. Something that made her soul feel naked and examined. Fear should have rooted her to the spot. Every instinct inherited from countless generations of survival should have sent her running back to the safety of her grandmother's arms. But instead, Kachina felt an inexplicable pull toward the creature. Not the mindless attraction of prey to predator, but something else entirely. Something that whispered to the deepest part of her spirit in a voice older than the rocks themselves. The great serpent seemed to sense her presence without turning its magnificent head. For a long moment, girl and snake regarded each other across the canyon floor, two beings from different worlds sharing a moment of recognition that transcended the boundaries between species. Then, with a movement so fluid it seemed like flowing water, the golden snake began to move deeper into the canyon system. But every few feet, it paused and turned its great head back toward Kachina, as if ensuring she was following. As if it wanted her to follow. Behind her, carried on the desert wind, Kachina could hear the distant sound of cavalry bugles and her people's increasingly desperate voices. The soldiers had arrived. Her world was about to change forever, just as it had changed for so many native children before her. But ahead of her, the golden serpent waited with the patience of eternity itself, offering a different path. A path into mystery, into the unknown canyons where even her own people rarely ventured. A path that might lead to answers, or to something far more dangerous than cavalry soldiers. Kachina looked back one last time toward the settlement where her grandmother waited, where safety and the familiar rhythms of her daily life called to her. Then she looked forward, toward the impossible creature that had emerged from the realm of legend into her desperate reality. The choice was hers alone. And in that moment, with the sound of soldiers' voices echoing off the canyon walls and the memory of blood-red water fresh in her mind, 5-year-old Kachina made the decision that would change not just her own life, but the fate of her entire people. She stepped forward, following the golden serpent deeper into the mysterious heart of the canyon, leaving behind everything she had ever known for the promise of something that might save them all. Or destroy her completely. The great snake moved ahead of her with hypnotic grace, leading her through passages that seemed to have been carved by ancient waters, past formations that looked like frozen waterfalls and stone cathedrals. Each step took her further from the world of humans and deeper into a realm where the laws of nature bent to older, stranger rules. As they traveled deeper into the canyon's maze, Kachina began to notice that the very air around the golden serpent seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly energy. Plants that should have been withered by the desert sun grew lush and green in the creature's wake. Water seeped from solid rock where its scales had touched the stone. And in the distance, carried on air currents that defied the canyon's still atmosphere, came the sound of something impossible. Water. Not the blood-red liquid that had poisoned their sacred spring, but the pure, clear sound of flowing water. Lots of water. More water than had been seen in these drought-stricken lands for years. The golden serpent paused at the entrance to a narrow passage that seemed to lead directly into the heart of the mountain itself. Its great head turned back toward Kachina one final time, and in its ancient eyes she saw something that made her young heart race with anticipation and terror. Intelligence. Purpose. And something else that she was still too young to name, but old enough to recognize. Destiny. The narrow passage opened into a cathedral of stone that took Kachina's breath away. High above, shafts of golden sunlight pierced through natural openings in the rock ceiling, illuminating the most beautiful sight she had ever witnessed. A vast underground pool of crystal-clear water stretched before her, fed by a waterfall that cascaded down from heights lost in shadow. The sound of flowing water that had called to her through the canyon walls was magnified here into a symphony of liquid music. But it wasn't the water that made her gasp with wonder and fear. The walls of the hidden chamber were covered in paintings. Not the simple petroglyphs she knew from the outer canyons, but elaborate murals painted in colors that seemed to glow with their own inner light. The images told a story that made her young mind reel with understanding and terror. She saw her own people, painted in vivid detail, but not as they were now. These were the Navajo of generations past, when they were strong and numerous, when their land stretched from horizon to horizon. The paintings showed great ceremonies, abundant harvests, and herds of horses that darkened the plains like storm clouds. And in every scene, coiled around the edges or woven through the composition like a golden thread, was the great serpent. Sometimes protecting the people from enemies, sometimes guiding them to new lands, sometimes bringing rain to end terrible droughts. The snake was not just an animal in these ancient paintings. It was a guardian spirit, a keeper of sacred knowledge, a bridge between the world of humans and the realm of the divine. The golden serpent had brought her to see her people's true history, but that wasn't the end of the revelation. At the far end of the chamber, partially hidden behind the waterfall, Kachina discovered something that made her heart pound with excitement and understanding. Carved shelves held dozens of clay vessels, each one sealed and marked with symbols she somehow recognized despite never having seen them before. Her small hands trembled as she approached the nearest shelf, drawn by an instinct older than conscious thought. The first vessel she touched crumbled at her gentle pressure, revealing its precious contents. Seeds. Hundreds of seeds, each one perfectly preserved despite what must have been decades or even centuries of storage. But these weren't ordinary seeds. As they spilled into her palms, she could feel the life force contained within them, waiting to burst forth with the proper care and attention. More vessels revealed more seeds, each variety different from the last. Corn that could grow in the harshest drought. Beans that could thrive in soil too poor for any other crop. Medicinal plants that could cure illnesses her people had forgotten how to treat. Sacred tobacco that could carry prayers directly to the spirits. Everything her drought-stricken, persecuted people needed to not just survive, but flourish once again. The golden serpent watched from the edge of the pool as understanding dawned in Kachina's young mind. This wasn't just a hiding place for ancient seeds. This was a sanctuary, a vault of knowledge and survival tools left by her ancestors for the day when their descendants would need them most. And that day had come. As she filled her small gathering pouch with the precious seeds, Kachina heard something that chilled her blood. Echoing down through the passages she had traveled, carried by the canyon's perfect acoustics, came the sound of gunshots. Not the single crack of a hunting rifle, but the rapid volley of military weapons. The cavalry had reached her settlement. Fear for her grandmother and her people gave her speed as she gathered as many seed varieties as her small pouch could hold. But as she prepared to leave this miraculous sanctuary, the golden serpent moved between her and the passage that led back to the outer world. For a moment, she thought the great creature meant to trap her here, to keep her from returning to help her people. But then she looked into its ancient eyes and saw something different. Not captivity, but preparation. Not imprisonment, but instruction. The serpent's great head lowered until it was level with her own, and for one impossible moment, Kachina felt as though she could hear its thoughts as clearly as if it spoke in her grandmother's voice. The seeds were only part of what she needed to save her people. Knowledge was equally important. And knowledge took time to transfer, even from an ancient spirit guardian to a 5-year-old child. Images flowed through her mind like water through the canyon. She saw which seeds to plant first and how to prepare the soil. She learned the proper ceremonies to ensure good growth, and when to harvest for maximum potency. Most importantly, she discovered the locations of other hidden springs throughout the canyon system, water sources that could sustain her people even if they were forced to flee deeper into the wilderness. When the knowledge transfer was complete, Kachina felt different. Not older exactly, but wiser. Not stronger in body, but infinitely stronger in spirit. The golden serpent had given her more than seeds and water locations. It had given her the power to lead her people through the dark times that lay ahead. She turned to thank her magnificent teacher, but the great serpent was already fading, becoming translucent like morning mist. As she watched in wonder, the golden scales lost their luster, and the mighty form dissolved into streams of golden light that flowed back into the walls of the chamber, merging with the painted images of generations past. The spirit guardian had completed its purpose. The knowledge had been passed to the next generation. Now it was up to Katchina to use what she had learned. Racing through the canyon passages with supernatural speed, guided by her new understanding of the hidden waterways, Katchina emerged near her settlement just as the sun reached its zenith. What she found there broke her heart and strengthened her resolve simultaneously. The cavalry had indeed come, but they hadn't brought violence as everyone had feared. Instead, they brought orders for immediate relocation to a reservation 300 miles south, where the land was poor and the water scarce. Her people had been given 2 hours to gather their possessions before the forced march would begin. But Katchina now knew something the soldiers didn't. Deep in the canyons her ancestors had painted, there were sanctuaries the cavalry would never find. Hidden springs that could support her entire tribe. And most importantly, seeds that could transform even the harshest desert into a garden of plenty. As she ran toward her grandmother's dwelling, the pouch of miraculous seeds bouncing against her hip, Katchina smiled for the first time since the blood-red spring had announced the morning's disasters. The golden serpent had been right to choose her. She was small and young, easily overlooked by soldiers focused on adult threats. She could guide her people to safety through passages too narrow for horses and men in heavy uniforms. The discovery she had made by following an impossible creature into the hidden heart of the canyon would not just save her people from this immediate crisis. It would restore their connection to the ancient wisdom of their ancestors and ensure their survival for generations to come. And somewhere in the back of her mind, painted in golden light against the darkness of uncertainty, Katchina carried the knowledge that guardian spirits never truly disappear. They simply wait for the next moment when their people need them most, ready to emerge from legend into reality once again. The blood-red spring that had terrified everyone that morning would run clear by sunset, cleansed by waters flowing from the hidden sanctuary. The soldiers would find an empty settlement by nightfall, the Navajo having vanished into the canyon maze like morning mist. But they wouldn't be lost. They would be home, in the hidden places their ancestors had prepared for them, tending gardens that would grow green and lush even in the heart of the desert, guided by the wisdom of a 5-year-old girl who had been brave enough to follow a golden serpent into the realm of miracles.